Hi everyone. Today I'm going to be talking about Constellation Network and their DAG token. Now, for clarity, I hold this token and I'm not a financial advisor, so this video is for educational and entertainment purposes only. So today I'm going over the Constellation Network and the DAG token in full. I'll cover what it is, the problems it solves, the tokenomics, the unique utility, and the value capture mechanisms of the DAG token. Now, the Constellation Network is a Layer 0 protocol with infinite scalability and zero fees. Layer 0 means that it sits beneath traditional Layer 1s such as Bitcoin, Ethereum, or Avalanche, etc. But it can interoperate and interact with any of them. Interoperability really is the elephant in the room when it comes to crypto. All these different protocols being built, they must be able to interact with each other. Imagine you have a Samsung phone and you can only communicate with not only other Samsung phones, but they had to be on your network as well, like Vodafone or Verizon. It's crazy, but almost all protocols are like this and have no interoperability built into them. Constellation Network can interact with any system or any device in the world that uses data of any kind, either inside or outside of crypto. Now, that's a huge statement because it means that Constellation can work with any legacy system or device from the real world, and that's mind-blowing. This opens up all kinds of use cases that haven't been possible before with blockchains or DLT systems that we're all used to, especially since most of them use a transaction fee model, which can get real expensive real fast when you're doing high volume of transactions. One key area where Constellation Network is different to the blockchains that we're all used to. See, Constellation is technically not a blockchain, it's a DAG or directed acyclical graph, and you can basically think of this as the next evolution of blockchain technology that's both much faster and much more scalable. Now, without getting into too many of the technicalities about how it actually works, the DAG structure or the hypergraph allows Constellation to tackle some of the biggest issues we see in blockchains. That's going to be speed, scalability, and cost. Now, we're all used to seeing how traditional blockchains can get overwhelmed when they have huge spikes and transaction volumes out of nowhere. Even the layer 2s, they have their limits. Now, as you'll see later in this video, for the kind of use cases that Constellation Network are targeting, the performance issues we're used to with regular blockchains like Ethereum, they're just not going to cut it. That is not going to be acceptable. They're basically building a kind of a new internet for big data that will eventually be able to handle all the data produced in the world. So there's no waiting in line for earlier transactions to be processed before yours can go through like you would see with traditional blockchain. Also, any data that enters the hypergraph network before it's entered is validated at source by the nodes without the need for any oracles. Then, as it's travelling through the network, it's continuously being validated at each point on its journey, and this means that the network can promise extremely high levels of security, the kind of security that will be needed for governments and military applications. Now, one of Constellation's current customers is the US Air Force. Imagine the levels of due diligence that were carried out before the US Department of Defense were satisfied Constellation Network could handle their data securely. All of the nodes on the hypergraph are responsible for monitoring their neighbours, which are the other nodes closest to them. Basically, they're always watching each other to make sure that each node is doing accurate work and is being honest. Now, this forms the custom consensus that Constellation built for the hypergraph, and it's called proof of reputable observation. This means that the network doesn't need to use proof of work, and it doesn't even need to use proof of stake. As a result, the network is highly energy efficient compared to regular blockchains, and the nodes require very little power to run. Some of the light nodes can even be run on a cell phone. Now, one thing I find really intriguing about the hypergraph network and the way it scales horizontally is that it actually gets faster with more bandwidth and more transactions per second the more it's used. Imagine if something gets faster and more efficient the more it's used. I'll say it again, the more you use it, the faster the network becomes, instead of getting slower and clogged up like a regular blockchain. Later in the video, you'll also see how DAG stakers, holders, and node runners directly benefit from this as well, because the value capture for the DAG token is very impressive, and the more the network is used, the more value the DAG token absorbs. Now, the second key difference between Constellation Network's hypergraph and a regular blockchain is the idea of state channels. Now, I've seen it said that you can think of state channels as kind of an evolution of smart contracts, but really what they are is they are autonomous businesses built on the hypergraph. State channels are their own independent DAG networks inside the hypergraph for specific businesses or use cases, and the overall structure allows for an unlimited number of state channels. And this fact, combined with the technology allowing hypergraphs to validate any data at source before it enters the network without the use of oracles, mean that state channels are much better suited for the largest real-world applications that have huge transaction volumes. The kind of business use cases that would just crush any particular blockchain just because of transaction volume alone, let alone not being able to deal with all the different data types. Now, every state channel is completely customizable out of the box, so whatever the business wants to do in terms of data is going to work. Obviously, each state channel is also interoperable as well, so everything on the hypergraph can talk to each other. So now we've taken a basic look at what the Constellation network is and some of the problems it's trying to solve. Now I want to look at the tokenomics and the use case for the DAG token. It has some really unique value capture mechanisms and some impressive opportunities for passive income, which I really want to get into. If you hold DAG, or are thinking of buying DAG, or are just wondering what the hell the DAG token does, you're going to want to understand this. The tokenomics for DAG really are unique and unlike anything else I've seen in crypto. Strong tokenomics are one of the key things I look for in my personal investment decisions, and that's why I've been heavily accumulating DAG. The tokenomics for DAG are based on a concept called generative economics, which is designed in a way that will allow for every holder and every participant in the Constellation ecosystem to benefit as the network sees more and more usage. Now, I appreciate that sounds a little bit woolly, but stick with me here because DAG's value capture mechanisms are seriously legit, and I want to explain how they work. Basically, the token has been set up in a way that will allow it to capture the value of all the data and all of the activity on the network by all participants. State channels really are at the highest level of what DAG represents. It's tokenized throughput or bandwidth on the network. It's really needed in some way or another for absolutely everything that you can do on the hypergraph. And remember, its supply is capped. So, as the usage of the network goes up and up, DAG is designed to capture that, and you'll struggle to find any other crypto that has such a close tie between the network use and the value capture of the token. So, if you think of a stock index and how the index itself captures the value of all the companies in the index, DAG is somewhat familiar in terms of how it works, except that it has a massive utility. For anyone that wants to do anything on the hypergraph, the Constellation website says this about the DAG token. DAG is the financial state channel of the Constellation network. It allows for seamless exchange and interaction between the various state channels and nodes that make up the network. DAG binds the network components together so that they relate to one another. But let's get more specific in terms of the actual day-to-day use cases for the DAG token that we can actually relate to. These are the primary use cases for DAGs. Firstly, zero-fee transactions on the hypergraph are made possible either by holding DAG or running a node. The more DAG an entity holds, or the more nodes they run, the more zero-fee throughput they have access to. Now, if a state channel exceeds the threshold of zero-fee transactions, they can also use DAG to pay for any additional transactions. Every new Layer 0 token that's created requires DAG to be locked up, as does the creation of every new state channel. DAG is needed for interoperability with other blockchains, but also just for basic throughput and transmission data across the hypergraph, and running any kind of consensus on data. So, Really, anything you do on the network requires DAG in some way or another, and remember, it has a cap supply. It's also worth noting that the DAG required by the state channels to do everything they need to do on the hypergraph is required on an ongoing basis. It's not just at the point of a transaction to pay for the transaction or at the point you create a new state channel. It's long-term locking up of DAG on a network that is infinitely scalable, zero fee with a hard supply cap on the token. So all this leads me to believe that as the network usage grows, there is a lot of potential for price appreciation in the DAG token. What we haven't touched on yet are the passive income opportunities, which honestly are really impressive. That's one of the things I'm most excited about as an investor in the Constellation network, and this project really does have everything that I look for in a long-term, stable, passive income opportunity that's sustainable. Now, if we look at the tokenomics, we can see that in order to secure, validate, and stream large quantities of DAG for free state channels, you have three options, and these are: number one, staking DAG to grant increased access to network utility, which is transactions per second or bandwidth; number two, spinning up or purchasing existing DAG nodes; or number three, a combination of one and two. Now, if we focus on option number one, which is locking more liquidity into the state channel, we know from the tokenomics paper that the more liquidity that is locked up, the higher the transactions per second and the higher the bandwidth the state channel can facilitate for free. Now, for me, this looks to be huge in terms of passive income opportunities for DAG holders, and the reason is that state channels will be competing with each other to incentivize holders to put liquidity in their state channels versus the competitors. And this is where things get interesting for me, because the paper lays out a couple of different strategies that state channels businesses could use to incentivize users to point their liquidity into their state channel. That includes incentivizing them with their own Layer 0 tokens, incentivizing them with DAG, or even incentivizing them with other coins such as Bitcoin, Ethereum, or stablecoins. So it looks like each individual state channel could end up becoming its own independent rewards pool, waiting to incentivize DAG holders, all without increasing the supply of the DAG token. This could also lead to a healthy secondary market for the trading of DAG nodes. So if you have a node that has a good pro score and good history, we could have a situation where state channels need additional throughput on the network. They need it fast, they need it reliably, so they'll be willing to pay a premium for nodes that have a good history and a good standing on the network. So we've taken a brief look at both opportunities for capital appreciation with the DAG token, but also passive income as well. But so far this has been fairly conceptual. So now what I want to do is look at some of my favourite real world use cases for Constellation Network and the hypergraph, so you can see what's running right now, what's coming, and how this actually translates to people using the hypergraph. Now, one of the most exciting things for me about Constellation Network and the ecosystem is the huge variety of use cases that it makes possible, that are honestly just not possible with any other blockchain. One thing you'll notice is that the state channel business is building on the hypergraph. They're not building copy and paste yield farms or crappy NFT projects or anything like that. They're working on solving huge problems in the real world. Let's look at a crazy partnership Constellation Network has with the United States Department of Defense. You may have heard of them. They have been working publicly with Constellation Network now for several years. I can't think of any entity on the planet who is likely to be more concerned with the security of their data than the US military, specifically the US Air Force. For me, this is basically the biggest sign of confidence you could ever ask for, that this technology is legit and does what it says it does. It's hard to imagine the level of due diligence that must have been required for this deal to move forward, or honestly, to think of any bigger deal than this in crypto today. In terms of the scope of the project, it's described as end-to-end data security using blockchain encryption and hosting decentralization. If you remember, at the start of this video, we discussed how Constellation Network can work with any data from any legacy system. This was key to them securing this Department of Defense contract, as it meant that none of the legacy systems needed to be changed in order to work with the hypergraph. This is an actual statement from one of the Department of Defense press releases, which is kind of crazy to me that they're even saying this publicly. The federal government can rely on Constellation to use its native currency DAG to secure bandwidth on the network. This multi-domain effort includes stakeholders from several Department of Defense agencies. I imagine there's a lot more going on behind closed doors with this deal that they'll never be able to speak about publicly. But for me, this is probably the biggest confidence you could ask for any crypto project. So yes, the Department of Defense will be running multiple state channels, which as we know means buying and locking up DAG. Constellation Network and their DAG token are a sleeping giant and potential behemoth in the crypto world, and I'm excited to be part of it. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe for more.